Hello, and thank you for joining us for our Best Practices webinar on Enrollment Manager Performance. My name is Keith Beindorf, and I'll be hosting our webinar today. And I look forward to walking through what I hope are some really helpful things for you and your staff as you work with Enrollment Manager and want to get the most out of performance. Before we get started, let me just outline a few things about our format. We're using GoToWebinar, which allows you to interact with me in the following ways. First of all, you have a little control panel that you can hide or display anytime you wish. And as the webinar is going on today, if you don't mind sending questions to us using the question pane, all the phones will be muted just so that you can hear me okay, but we will have time at the end to answer any questions that come up along the way. So please use the question pane as you see here. Let's talk a little bit about our agenda today. I've got 5 topics that I want to cover before we get to the Q&A session. First, I want to talk a little bit about web application architecture and basically what makes web pages different than what you're doing in Enrollment Manager. We're going to talk about how to optimize your desktop for best performance. Go through some troubleshooting steps, so if you're having performance issues, the things that you should try to do. We're going to look at some common errors and warnings that you may see within Enrollment Manager and ways that you can suppress those kinds of pop-up messages and warnings. And then finally, we're going to go over the tools that are available to you to diagnose any performance issues that you might have. And all that will be before we get to our Q&A session, which will allow you to ask any questions that you might have. Before we get into the presentation, I'd like to kind of level the playing field and talk about some specific terminology that I'll be using during the presentation. For those of you that may not be very technical, I want to make sure that you understand the terms that we're using. Starting with the desktop. When we refer to the desktop, that's the computer that you are using locally. So for most people, that's either a desktop PC or a laptop. So that's the machine that you are using. We'll also talk about servers. Servers are the computers that we have on our end. And the servers are, big beefy computers that store, manipulate, and display data. All those servers are in our secure data center. So that's where, all the back-end processing happens. We'll also talk a lot about browsers today, and the browser is essentially software on your computer, on your desktop, that you use to access Enrollment Manager. And today, that's Internet Explorer is the name of the browser that you're currently using. We'll talk about the client, and a client in this regard is your way of accessing Enrollment Manager. And for most of our folks, you're accessing Enrollment Manager using the browser. You're using Internet Explorer, and that's what we call the web client. So that's what it gives you access to Enrollment Manager from any computer that has Internet Explorer installed, that you can browse the web and go to Enrollment Manager. For others, you're using the Outlook client, which is very similar functionality, but you're actually seeing Enrollment Manager from within Microsoft Outlook. And then some of you are accessing Enrollment Manager from mobile devices, and that's what we call the mobile client. So when we talk about clients, that's what we're referring to here. And finally, we'll talk about domains. And a domain is simply an address that's used to access a website. So in this case, the domain that you'll be going to most often is your orgname.422x.com, and that's how you access Enrollment Manager. Google.com is another domain. So when we talk about domains, that's what we're referring to. So let's talk about, before we talk about your desktop and the things that you can do locally, let's talk about some of the things that we have done here at Ruffalo Cody to improve performance and capacity. And in the last 6 months, most of you are aware of this, but we've done a lot of work. Essentially, we've replaced every server that is in use for Enrollment Manager. So every server that's used in the back end in our data center, is brand new, and that's those are servers that do everything from managing your imports to displaying web content for your forms and event information. That includes the databases, database servers where we're storing all of your data, the backup devices. Every one of those has been replaced over the last 6 months. And as part of that, we've increased the capacity of each of those and the horsepower, which means they are faster and bigger and stronger than the previous servers. And in addition, we've added some staffing, hired some of the best experts in the field that know not only a lot about data center management and things like that, but have specific knowledge in the platform that we use, which is the Microsoft Dynamics CRM platform. So we've got some great assistants to help us with fine-tuning. In addition to that, we have been in consultation with Microsoft on an ongoing basis for the last several months as they analyze our setup and what we're doing with their platform to make sure that we're making the best use of their tools. And obviously they have great expertise there since they developed the platform. That's what's going on the server side. Let's talk a little bit about web applications and what that really is all about, because we sometimes get questions from our users about Enrollment Manager, and they'll say, you know what, when I bring up Google or when I bring up a web page, it happens pretty fast. Why isn't Enrollment Manager that fast? And there are actually lots of reasons that might go into that, but I wanted to just talk a little bit about the differences between a typical web page and a web application, which is what Enrollment Manager is. A web page, like you see here on the left-hand side, is a pretty small amount of data that's actually being displayed in your browser on your desktop. And in this case, it's an article with some text, a couple of pictures, some social networking links. All in all, very little information is actually downloaded to display what you see here on the screen. On the right-hand side, you'll see Enrollment Manager. And so what happens when you go to an Enrollment Manager page like this, where we're bringing down information? Well, lots of different things might happen. So let me kind of walk through just a few of those so that you have a better sense of kind of what happens in the midst of launching Enrollment Manager. So getting my highlighter here, I'm going to just highlight a couple of things. First of all, the menus that you see, the menu along the top here, as well as the menu down the side here. These menus are generated on the fly as you launch Enrollment Manager, but these menus are different for everybody based on their security roles. So one of the things that we're doing every time we display any data within Enrollment Manager is we're checking your security roles. We're looking to see what you do have permissions to see and what you don't have permission to see, and making the right decisions in terms of what to display. In addition to that, when you come to a screen like this one, we're going to download some sample data for you. For instance, here we're showing person records, and you'll see here down at the very bottom we're indicating that there's a total of almost 60,000 of these records in the database. We're displaying the first 250 of those. So as just a part of opening this record, we're actually downloading to your desktop 250 records with information about each one of those records here in this screen. So a lot of data is coming down as part of just opening the site here. In addition, a lot of things are going to happen based on what you do here. So for instance, every time you open or save a record, there's a lot of functionality that's going on both on your desktop as well as on our server to make sure that we're updating records, we're kicking off workflow maybe based on a change that you just made. So lots of different things are going on here that don't typically happen with a simple web page. So in addition to that, we'll talk a little bit about the architecture of an application like this. And we're not going to get into a big discussion here. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things related to how you're accessing the application. Up here at the top of this diagram, you'll see information about the clients that I referred to before. So the web client, the Outlook client, the mobile client. So as you're using your local desktop computer, what's happening is a lot of activities going on behind the scenes because your browser, in this case Internet Explorer, is connecting to our data center. And our data center is basically everything below this dotted line. So down below the dotted line is what's happening on our end. And we use what's called web services. So that when you're connecting using any device, you're using the same set of web services. And a lot of things are happening back behind the scenes. I mentioned some of these, but as we're doing what are called plug-in information, pre-event, post-event plugins, so that when you act inside of Enrollment Manager, certain things have to happen because of that. Let's say you enter a new test score into the system. Well, part of what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, is that an official test score or not? If it is, we need to make sure we're updating our opportunity requirements or your application requirements. We need to make sure that if the test score is official, that we are updating the high score, and that's going to happen through a calculation. So we're going to rerun the high score calculation for that student, taking a look at your preferences, how your school has that set up, making the appropriate changes on the form, and saving that data. So all that might be happening as part of just one simple interaction on your side of entering in a new test score. Okay, so let's talk about your desktop now. When we talk about optimizing the desktop, there's one thing that you can do that will have a far bigger impact than anything else. And if there's only one thing that you do as a result of this webinar, hopefully this is it. And that is that Microsoft built the technologies that we use. They built the underlying architecture called Microsoft Dynamics CRM. And they built it in such a way that it's going to take advantage of their latest desktop technologies. Their latest desktop technologies include Windows 7 and Internet Explorer 9. So the very best desktop you can use on your as you're using Enrollment Manager is one that is equipped with Windows 7 and Internet Explorer 9. And we find that a lot of our clients, unfortunately, don't have that. And so the question is, well, should you upgrade? And the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, if you're not using Windows 7 at this point, you're using a desktop operating system that isn't even supported anymore by Microsoft. So here are the sort of the three operating systems that we tend to see in use. Unfortunately, a lot of folks are still using Windows XP, which is very old. Windows XP debuted in 2001, so it's 11 years old. And we find a lot of folks are still using that, even though the support for that at Microsoft actually ended in 2009. And even Windows Vista, which was the operating system to come after that, debuted in 2007, so over 5 years ago, and its end of support was earlier this year. So if you're using something other than Windows 7, it's a platform that Microsoft themselves don't even support. So we do encourage you, if there's one thing you can do, make sure you're using Windows 7. Windows 7, if you didn't know, debuted 3 years ago, and will be supported for the next 3 years. So it's by far the best platform that you can be using right now. And we can also provide some statistical information to back up exactly what it is you get with this kind of an upgrade. So one of the things that we'll talk about later are some tools that we have in place to help you diagnose problems, and we use those tools to do some benchmark testing. So here are some results that we did using actually real client databases to show the differences between those that are using Windows 7 and Internet Explorer 9 and those that are using something older like Windows XP and Internet Explorer 8. And so on the left-hand side, you'll see 3 different tests. And these, you don't have to understand what these tests are. They all do essentially manipulation of data. But they're designed specifically for this platform because they're doing things that are very typical for something like Enrollment Manager. So as you open up an Enrollment Manager form, as you save data, as you interact with Enrollment Manager, these three items on the left are the types of things that are happening many times in one session. So what you'll see here, for instance, if you look at this test on the bottom, we've got the JavaScript array manipulation. This process, you'll see, is exponentially faster if you're using Windows 7 and IE 9 than if you're using Windows XP and IE 8. And this is in milliseconds, so you might say, well, gee, can I really tell the difference between 400 milliseconds and 10 milliseconds? And the answer is probably no, if not if you're just doing one JavaScript array manipulation. But the reality is that when you're opening up Enrollment Manager, this is something that might happen 100 times in one session. So you multiply this by 100, and then suddenly, yeah, there's a big difference between 400 some milliseconds and 10 milliseconds. So this is just some empirical kind of evidence showing you the kinds of differences you can expect if you are using the latest platform. So for those of you that maybe already are using the latest platform, what are some other things that we should be thinking about? Well, some other tips for kind of optimizing things include making sure that 422x.com is in what's called your trusted sites. And if you're not familiar with trusted sites, this is something in Internet Explorer that allows you to indicate the sites that you trust, that you are, don't come with viruses or any kind of spamming technology. And what that means is that Internet Explorer will be optimized to run as quickly as possible. It's not going to have to be looking to check, gee, should I, do I need to analyze the URL? Do I need to look for spamming or phishing kinds of technologies? Or can I just display the data that the user wants? And in this case, you can just display that data. So make sure that at 422x.com is part of those trusted sites. And to show you where you do that, you'll simply go to Internet Explorer and go to Tools, Internet Options, Security, and you'll see a check mark here for trusted sites. And then if you click on the Sites button, it'll tell you which sites you have already indicated should be trusted. And the one you want to make sure is there is star.422x.com. And as long as that is there, that means that you've indicated that any of the 422x.com sites can be trusted, including Enrollment Manager, events, and forms, and everything else that we do here. The next thing you can check is to make sure that you've turned off any pop-up blockers. Or if you find that you really need pop-up blockers, that you exclude 422x.com in your settings somehow. And pop-up blockers can come from lots of different places. Internet Explorer has a built-in pop-up blocker technology. If you've added 422x.com to your trusted sites, you shouldn't have any problems with that. But you can also have pop-up blockers that come from other places, like toolbars that you've installed from Google or Yahoo or different places like that. Maybe your security software includes pop-up blocker technology. Make sure that you either turn those off completely or at least sort of whitelist 422x.com, because we do use pop-ups in a lot of different places to display data to you. We want to make sure that those can be displayed without any problem. Next, you want to make sure that you have turned off what's called compatibility mode in Internet Explorer. Now, what is compatibility mode? It's essentially a way for you to run Internet Explorer in a previous version. So for instance, if I bring up Internet Explorer again here, I'm using Internet Explorer version 9. And I know that because if I go to Help and say About Internet Explorer, it's going to tell me which version I'm using. And the official version is right below here. It's 9.0.8112. If I run this in compatibility mode, it basically is allowing me to run Internet Explorer as if it were still version 8. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, some web applications, and this does not include ours, but some require you to use Internet Explorer 8 or lower. And if you're using Internet Explorer 9, they don't work that well. So what you want to do is make sure that if you've had to turn that on for some reason, that you turn it off now. In Internet Explorer, it's real easy. Under Tools, you'll see Compatibility View and Compatibility View Settings. And this is where you can either look at specific sites in compatibility mode, or what we find sometimes is that a user has turned on all websites in compatibility view. And that's a bad thing when it comes to Enrollment Manager, because again, to take advantage of the full performance of Enrollment Manager, you need to be using Internet Explorer 9. By checking this box, you're basically turning your browser into Internet Explorer 8, which we definitely don't want. So anyway, make sure that that is completely turned off for Internet Explorer. Next, review your antivirus settings. A lot of different systems and campuses all have different systems in place for this, but chances are you have some sort of antivirus or web security platform running on your desktop. And a lot of times what that will do is every time you open a web page of any kind, it's going to scan all of the data, it's going to look for specific kinds of scripts and problems, and it basically is going to slow down what you're doing. So the one thing you can do is find out what kind of system you're using and see if there's a way that you can exclude any scanning of the 422x.com domain. Now, that's important because, again, if you think back to what we talked about before, when you open up Enrollment Manager, all the different kinds of data that's being downloaded to your desktop and displayed, there's lots of stuff going on there. And if every time you display a page, your antivirus software is scanning and looking and trying to find problems, it's just going to slow down the work that you're doing. So definitely check into that. Next, remove or turn off any toolbars that you have. And we find lots of people have toolbars. You can have toolbars from Google or Bing or Yahoo, or some of the worst ones are actually like coupon toolbars and shopping toolbars. And again, the reason you want to turn these kinds of things off is because they are also doing a good bit of scanning and work behind the scenes that you may not even be aware of, because they're trying to be helpful, but at the same time they're taking up bandwidth because they're slowing down what you're trying to do to work. This is another problem we see, is streaming applications. We'll be working with somebody who has real slow performance. We'll connect to their desktop and see that they're streaming music through Spotify or Pandora or something like that, or worse, streaming some sort of video off to the side. Those kinds of things, again, are taking up lots of bandwidth, so you want to make sure that you turn off any applications that are doing that type of thing. Because when you think about what you're doing on your desktop with Enrollment Manager, it's basically a pipeline. There's a pipeline coming from us in our data center to your computer. And part of that pipeline is streaming Enrollment Manager data to you. And if you have lots of other things going on in addition to that, antivirus kinds of checking, streaming music, or toolbars that are doing lots of work, all of those are helping clog up that pipeline. And we want to make sure that the pipeline is as clear as possible for the stuff that's important. And in this case, it's Enrollment Manager data. So let's walk through some troubleshooting steps. If you are having performance issues, what are some of the things you should do? Well, we talked about the ideal desktop, so obviously those kinds of things are important. Make sure that you're using the latest browser, the latest operating system. But if all of that is in place and you're still seeing issues, here are some steps that you can sort of walk through. First is just restarting your browser. A lot of folks find that if they completely shut down all of the windows they have in Internet Explorer and then reopen them and start over, that will help, because particularly for users that don't log off at the end of the day, or perhaps they log off of Enrollment Manager but they leave Internet Explorer open overnight, the next day they come in and they just log right back in again. Well, the issue is that Internet Explorer does what's called caching. They will sort of store pieces of Enrollment Manager locally and the first time that you log into the browser. So you might have some stuff stored on your local desktop that's been there since yesterday or maybe the day before. And the issue is that we are constantly updating Enrollment Manager with new features and functionality. So you might be using a slightly older version, if you will, of some of the code. So restarting your browser, at least on a daily basis, is good to do anyway. In a similar fashion, restarting your computer sometimes helps because, again, there's lots of stuff that gets stored locally. If you're using Internet Explorer or even other applications a lot, sometimes it'll start to run down the memory on your system a little bit. And restarting your computer is always a good way to refresh your memory, refresh what's going on your desktop, and help all of your applications run more quickly. So that's helpful to do. I mentioned before making sure that 422x.com is in your trusted sites, so make sure that you check that. If all that is looking fine and you're still having performance issues, try logging into somebody else's desktop, like a neighbor. Go next door to the person who works next to you, log in using your credentials but on their desktop, and just see if you're getting the same behavior, because that gives us in our support team some information to go on if you say, you know what, it's really slow on my computer, but if I go to Jane's computer next to me, it seems fine. What could the problem be? Next is to check the performance either on different parts of the campus or off campus. Because this is something that we also see in support, is that we'll get word from a client that they're having performance issues. We'll try it from here and performance is really quite good, and we'll see if they can sort of check off campus somewhere, either log in from a coffee shop or something like that, and see if there's a difference, because sometimes we find that the campuses are just having a lot of congestion with internet connectivity, and that congestion obviously has an impact on everything, including Enrollment Manager. Next are a couple of more technical steps, but these are completely outlined in the knowledge base. First is flush DNS. DNS is sort of a little directory of websites that get stored locally there on your computer, and occasionally we make some changes in our data center that changes the addresses of different servers and things like that. And while your computer should be keeping track of those, sometimes we find that it doesn't. So flushing DNS is a procedure that sort of wipes out that directory and starts building it again fresh. And that way you make sure you're getting the latest addresses from every website, including Enrollment Manager. And then there's also steps in our knowledge base to reset your browser. And essentially what that does is it takes Internet Explorer back to its original state when you first installed it. And sometimes that can be helpful because if you've made lots of tweaks to different things in Internet Explorer, you might have changed something that's having a performance impact with Enrollment Manager. So resetting the browser sort of back to its initial state is sometimes a helpful thing to do. And then finally, the diagnostics tools. And we're going to get into these at the very end of our webinar today. But we do have some diagnostics tools to help with troubleshooting as well. Okay, so let's talk about some of the common errors and warnings that you might be getting in Enrollment Manager and the kind of things that you can do about them. First is what are called the slow browser warnings, and this is something that Internet Explorer will display at times to indicate that you have some specific things going on your desktop and specifically in Internet Explorer that are slowing things down that you do have some control to change. So when you see this, a little pop-up window is going to appear at the very bottom of your screen like you see here, and that pop-up window is just going to indicate that you could speed up your browsing if you disabled some add-ons. And then there's going to be a button here which allows you to choose those add-ons, and that's going to display the window that you see here on the right. So when it displays, it's going to show you the add-ons that you have installed on your computer that might be slowing things down. So here you'll see I have 3 add-ons that were installed in my browser, and one of them is taking time. Every time I open up Internet Explorer, it's taking time to load that toolbar. And by simply disabling that, it's going to make Internet Explorer faster. And we sometimes see people that have literally 10 or 20 of these little add-ons that they've installed over time, and as you add more and more to them, obviously it's going to slow things down. So the fix for this is simply to disable any add-ons that maybe you don't use anymore. There could be some things in there that were installed and you didn't even know it. So those can be disabled just by clicking the disable button. Next, another common message we'll get is either a white screen or a message that pops up at the bottom that says a problem with this web page has caused Internet Explorer to close and reopen the tab. And essentially this will happen from time to time because the web page that you're on, in this case Enrollment Manager, is still processing data. It's still trying to display information, and then you're trying to click and do something else when it hasn't finished what it was doing. So essentially you're clicking faster than the application is processing, and these are the kinds of things that you might see from that. The fix is very simple. You just close the browser and then restart it. And if you're having continued issues with this, just make sure you're giving the application time to fully load all the stuff that it's trying to display on your screen before you start clicking to go someplace else. Next is a message that I think everybody is going to get at some point, and it can be quite annoying, but it's very easy to get rid of, and it's what we call the mixed content message. And usually it comes in the form of a little browser pop-up like you see here, and it's caused because of your browser settings. There's a default browser setting that will look to see if you're trying to display information from different places. And in this case, it's trying to display some information that's highly secure, like your Enrollment Manager data, but it's also trying to display something that might not be secure. A good example of this is in our travel management module. We have a couple of different places where we're displaying mapping information from Bing Maps. And Bing Maps data is going to appear within Enrollment Manager, but it's coming from Bing Maps, which is not a secure website. It's not trying to be, because it's not really displaying anything private. It's just showing you a map. But because we're showing you some content that is insecure, or unsecured rather, and we're showing some content that is highly secure, like your Enrollment Manager data, your browser is going to pop up a warning and say, wait a minute, there's mixed stuff coming in here, is that okay? And the answer, of course, is yes, that's fine. That's how the application was designed. So there's a setting you can go to turn this off, and here you'll see sort of the route to that, but I'll show it to you inside of Enrollment Manager, or inside of Internet Explorer. So again, if you go to Internet Explorer and go to Tools, Internet Options, Security, and then we're going to customize our level here. And under Custom Level, you'll see a whole bunch of settings that basically are controlling different things within Enrollment Manager. And if you scroll down, you'll get to a section called Miscellaneous. And in the Miscellaneous section, you will see a couple of requests here. And one of them is, do you want to display mixed content? And if by default this is going to be set to prompt, which is why you're getting that pop-up message. If you just enable this to display mixed content, you won't have to worry about that prompt anymore. It'll just display that by default. So another annoyance hopefully taken care of. Another one that again is just a pop-up warning. It doesn't really indicate a serious issue or anything like that, but it'll say Microsoft Dynamics CRM has encountered an error. And the cause of this, well, we wish there were only one. There actually are various times that this might come up. And it could be for a number of different reasons. It could be because of different things that are going on in your browser. Maybe you have two different things open and the browser gets confused. Lots of different things can prompt this message, and very rarely does it really indicate a problem with Enrollment Manager. So why does this pop-up come up? Well, Microsoft has built into really all of its products a feedback loop. So if it runs into any kind of an issue inside of the application, there's a mechanism for you to be able to send information about that problem to Microsoft. And then the way the system works with improving products is they accumulate all of this kind of data, and that gives them an idea of what they need to work on to improve future versions. So that's all that's happening here, is that some sort of an anomaly has occurred, and it's asking you whether you want to report it to Microsoft. So if you're getting this message fairly often and you want to get rid of it, there's an easy way to do so by changing what's called your privacy options inside of Enrollment Manager. So to do that, you simply open up Enrollment Manager, and in the upper left-hand corner you'll see the File menu. And if you choose File and Options, this pop-up window will come up here, and you'll click on the Privacy tab. And you'll see here in the Privacy tab that the default is that anytime one of these anomalies happens, it's going to ask you for permission to send an error report to Microsoft. And that's the pop-up message that you're getting there. So it's going to ask you every single time, do you want to send information? What you can do to avoid that is simply choose the middle option here. And that means it's going to automatically send that error report to Microsoft without asking you for permission. So the good news is Microsoft's getting the feedback that they need to improve the product, but you're not being bothered by asking permission every single time. So choose that middle option there, and you should be all set. All right, so let's walk through some other tips that will help you. First of all, part of what you can change in your user settings is determine which information you want to see by default. When you first launch Enrollment Manager, where do you typically need to go? What do you want to see when you first open up Enrollment Manager? And you have control of that. And that means that some things in Enrollment Manager display faster than others. So you might want to think about, okay, what is it that I typically want to do when I first get into the application? And maybe I want to display some sort of a pane or a tab that comes up quickly. The other thing you can do is determine how many records you want Enrollment Manager to display by default every time you view a page. And those are both of these items are things that you have control over, again, by looking at your Enrollment Manager options. So let's take a look at that. I'll go back to Enrollment Manager, and again here I'm going to choose File, Options. And right here on the General tab, the first thing I can do is choose which pane to display, and the pane is basically the menu items that you see down here below. So by default, I'm showing the Workplace pane, which gives me this Workplace menu. And the default tab that I'm displaying currently is the Dashboards tab. So, but if I want to look at something else by default, I can either choose a specific entity, like I want to look at person records or opportunity records, or I can even say, hey, I just want to display the home page by default. Any of those are available to me here. So you just check that and click OK. Now the next time I log in, it'll change it to be exactly what I want to see. So the other thing that you can change is how many records are displayed. So right now you'll see in this window I am displaying 250 records. And this, for a lot of users, is the default. It's showing you that many records every time you display this page. So I have the ability to page through these records to see the next 250. But the reality is, a lot of times if we're searching for a record, we don't need to see 250 records. We just need to see, maybe at most maybe 50 records. Well, every time I go to Enrollment Manager and click on the person's entity, it's going to show me the first 250 by default, which means it's going to bring down, obviously, 250 records to my desktop, which can take a while. So what I can do to speed up things is to, again, go to File, Options, and on my General tab, you'll again see here that I have the option to choose how many records are displayed by default. So the records per page right now is set to 250, and you'll see here I can make that really as low as 25 records. And what that means is that this page should load much faster because it's bringing down less information. If I click OK, it's going to refresh, and I'll click on my person's entity again, and now you'll see that it's only going to show me the first 25 records. I still have the ability to page through them. I still have the ability to search and jump to a specific point in the alphabet. Like if I know it begins with a D, I can click on D and it'll take me to the Ds. So I mean, I still have those kinds of functions, but you'll just see that it's going to load faster because I have less records. So that's just some other tips for you. Okay, let's talk about the diagnostic tools. I mentioned this at the beginning. We have a few diagnostic tools that are in place to help you do just that, diagnose performance issues. And some of this depends on which client that you use. So first of all, if you're using the Outlook client, we do have specific things that you can do to make the Outlook client perform better, or to help trace problems that are happening with the Outlook client. So we'll talk about those. For anybody, the web client diagnostics will also be a big help. These are the diagnostic tools that we use to create that chart that you saw at the beginning of the webinar. So this will tell you how your performance looks as compared to other people. So you can compare a couple different desktops on your campus and run these tests and see what the results look like and compare them, and then send them to us in support, and we can tell you, what kinds of problems we might see. And then finally, we have a new tool that we just put in place that allows you to do a trace route to our data center. And for those of you that haven't done that before, it's basically a way for you to look at the path that data is taking all the way from your desktop to our server and look for any problems that might be there in the middle. So this is really helpful in diagnosing internet problems. Not so much what's going on your desktop or what's going on in our servers, but looking at the path to see what kinds of issues might be there. So let's take a look at each one of these, starting with the Outlook diagnostics tool. So when you first installed the Outlook client, you may not know this, but one of the things that was installed was a little diagnostics tool. And to get there, you just go to Start, Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2011, and Diagnostics, and you'll see that menu item there. And when you launch it, it's just going to open up in a little window like this. And here's where you can also make some changes to what goes on with the Outlook client, how you want it to handle email, whether you want automatic tracking, whether you want to be synchronizing data. All those kinds of things are available here for you to change to see what impact it has on performance. You'll also see at the top there's a second tab for advanced troubleshooting. And there's a couple things you can do here. One is you can enable tracing, which basically means it's going to look at everything that's going on between Outlook and Enrollment Manager, and it's going to trace all that information to help diagnose problems. And you should really only ever turn this on if you've been asked to by somebody on our support team, because it actually takes up more bandwidth and uses a lot of storage. So you don't want to do this unless you're trying to diagnose a problem. A couple other items that you can do, though. You'll see the middle option there is to delete any temporary files. So as Microsoft Outlook is using Enrollment Manager, it's storing a lot of temporary files locally, and sometimes that can slow things down after a while. So just clicking the delete button here is going to delete any of those temporary files that it was storing, and sometimes speed things up a little bit. And then finally, if you ever open up Outlook and find, hey, Enrollment Manager's not there, and it was yesterday, and that can happen for a number of reasons. If Outlook was shut down in a way that it wasn't happy about, maybe your machine crashed or your laptop ran out of power, whatever it might be, sometimes this will happen. And to get it to work again, you just click the Enable button here, and you'll restart Microsoft Outlook, and Enrollment Manager will be there again. So just a simple tip there. So that's for Outlook. For folks that are using the web client, we have a diagnostics tool that's built into Enrollment Manager. And to get to it, you're simply going to go to the address that you see here on the page. And the address includes this org name. You're not actually going to type in org name, you're going to type in the same name that you use to access Enrollment Manager now. So for Greenville University, which is our demo school, it's gu.422x.com/tool/diagnostics/diag.aspx. So you're going to use this address to access the web diagnostics tools. And these tools, again, are meant to help you run some tests. You can take a look at the results yourself. Sometimes even a non-technical person can look at the results and say, oh, wow, yeah, I see what the issue might be here. Or if you don't, there's a built-in tool to help you send those results to support. So when you go to that page, you're going to see something that looks just like this. And you'll see the data points that are listed here on the left-hand side. These are just the different tests that it's going to run. So it's going to check and see what your browser is, and it's going to see actually whether you're using compatibility mode and if that might be a problem. So it's going to run all these tests, and then it's going to collect the results in the section below. So to run the test, you just simply open this page and click the Run button. And when you do, in a few seconds, the entire test usually only takes a few seconds to run, and you'll see the results here. So there'll be a summary up here at the top. The summary probably doesn't help you that much, but it will kind of look at what's going on your desktop. The real results are in the section below, and again, if you look through that, you'll see it's going to analyze what browser you're using and compatibility mode issues. It's going to collect times that it took to do different things. And once you've collected these results, you can either compare them to other computers on your campus if you want to do the analysis yourself, or simply at the very bottom, just click on Email Results, and you can send those to our support team, and we'll take a look at them. But that's what that tool is designed to do. Okay, lastly, we have another tool that we've just put into place that does a trace route from our data center to your desktop. And to do it, all you have to do is go to this address. It's just trace.422x.com. And by doing so, you'll come to a web page that looks like this one. And it's going to ask you just for your name. And this is so that as we're collecting trace information on our server, we can identify who did the test. So if you just put your name in here and click OK, what it's going to do is run a test between your desktop and our server. And along the way, you'll see here, this is sort of an in-progress test. It says at the very top, 12% complete. You just let it keep running until it's 100% complete. And again, this test only takes a few seconds to run. It doesn't take long at all. And the results are going to be displayed in the lower left-hand side. There's going to be an analysis there that is going to outline any potential problems that it found along the way. And then you'll see the tabs across the top. And one of those tabs is what we call the performance graph. And this is basically just showing you, what kind of time it took to get from one location to another. And the interesting thing about this is that you're going to see something almost every time you run this test. You're going to see something very similar, and that is that the first few steps that you see happen very quickly, and you'll see on the left hand side how many milliseconds it took. So in 3 milliseconds we basically jumped 3 locations from the initial server. And these other locations sometimes are servers, they're routers, they're firewalls, lots of different things. So the first few jumps usually happen very quickly because it happens all within our data center. And our data center is set up to be extremely fast. At the other end are things that are happening on your desktop, or on your campus. So when the information makes it to your campus, it's probably, again, going to jump through a couple of routers or firewalls or things like that. And again, those are going to happen very quickly. So by the time the data makes it to campus, chances are it's going to get to you very, very quickly. Now, what about the middle section here? Well, everything that's happening here in the middle is the internet. So that's what's happening between our data center and your campus. And that, of course, is where we don't have any control over, speed or things like that. We just hope that it's going to find a good path. But it does sometimes help us find specific problems that might be going on. And they may not be problems that we can necessarily fix, but they're problems that help explain why we might be having some performance issues. Now, if you run this test and you get results like this, should you be concerned? Well, actually, no. I mean, what you're seeing here is pretty good test results, because the data that went from one system to the other made it in a very short period of time. So you really don't have to worry too much. When you see things that are up here in this red section, and that's at 170 milliseconds or more, that's when you are definitely going to see some performance problems and should be concerned. So what do you do with this information? Well, once you've collected it, you can either analyze it yourself, or have your IT folks might be able to add some perspective, or if you just want to send it to us, there's a button that you can press here on the form that puts all of this in a page that you can just copy and paste and send to our support team and say, hey, these are the results that we're seeing from the traceroute test. And we'll be happy to take those and see what we can do. All right. Well, now we're going to just open it up for a couple of questions. So if you have any specific questions, this is the time to use your question pane. And I see we have one question already related to browsers. And the question is about Internet Explorer. Is Internet Explorer still the only browser that can be used? And the answer is today, the answer is yes. Internet Explorer is still required, as is Windows. Now that is something that is going to change, and if you've read any of our documentation, like our vision statement for Enrollment Manager, you've probably seen that we do intend to support other browsers. In fact, this summer Microsoft will be doing a new release of the platform that supports at least 3 other browsers, including Google Chrome, Safari on the Mac, as well as Firefox. And we're going to be making some updates in our code in Enrollment Manager to make sure that that is supported as well. So in the future, and that future might be as early as this fall, you might be able to use other browsers to access Enrollment Manager. Now, we still have not set our policies in terms of which browsers we're going to support, because we haven't done enough testing yet to know that everything that we do in Enrollment Manager will work well in all those environments. But as we do, we'll be updating folks. But generally, so the answer today is yes, it has to be Internet Explorer, but in the future, maybe not. Maybe we'll be able to do some other things. So, any other questions from the group? Got a lot of folks here, and a couple of thank yous. Well, you're welcome. Well, if there are no other questions, we'll just go ahead and wrap this session up. Again, if you do have questions after the fact, after you've been through the webinar, feel free to send those to our support team. We'll be happy to answer questions as they come up. And look for other webinars like this on best practices as we help you learn how to use Enrollment Manager to its fullest. Thanks everybody for attending, and we'll see you again soon.